Lynn, Lynn. Someone was whispering my name. Someone or something I couldn't identify was repeating my name over and over again, softly, apologetically, almost like a prayer. Lynn, Lynn. I felt like I recognized the voice, but I couldn't connect it to anybody I knew. It was as if I was talking to myself, or some part of me was talking to some other part of me. Lynn, Lynn. I'm not given to metaphysics or mysticism, cult, or fanatical religious beliefs of any kind. I have never walked with Jesus or been visited by an angel or heard voices from disincarnate spirits. I like to think of myself as a scientist, pragmatic, practical. I observe phenomena, apply proven principles and reputable theories, evaluate results, and adjust the process until a desired end has been achieved. I am, in fact, a psychotherapist making my living with a private practice in Old Town, a suburb of Los Angeles County located in the South Bay. And yes, my name is Lynn Hamilton. But that evening, as I left my office, I felt the presence of something I can only describe as supernatural. It didn't make any sense, but I felt as if I had stepped into one of Tesla's electrical demonstrations. A low voltage energy wave gently shook me. Lynn. I had just wasted another Sunday evening in finishing my monthly billing, a little task that required more patience from me than my actual counseling work. Why didn't my lovely clients just pay me like they were supposed to? Why did I have to chase them? As I was walking out of the office building with a muttered curse on my lips for all insurance companies that tormented psychotherapists with pointless paperwork, pointless for the therapist, that is. The point for the insurance companies was to stall or refuse payment for legitimate services. But don't get me wrong. Otherwise, I was in a good mood. I was just undergoing my usual monthly billing blues. Legitimate services. Sometimes I wondered about that. Sometimes I felt like I had a gift for collecting unhappy wives of successful men for the purpose of administering psychotherapeutic placebos whose only function was to debit the husband's wealth and credit my own. Bitching housewives, I called them, meaning that such clients had no real problems. They just led vacuous lives, which left them wondering why they felt lonely and unhappy. But they did have one real problem. They were all emotionally abandoned by husbands who were willing to pay for counseling as long as they, the husbands, didn't have to interact with their wives and listen to their complaints. After the tedium of billing, I was feeling somewhat cynical about the entire process, and it occurred to me that I might have been suffering from the two B's of most occupations, boredom and burnout. I would have to think about that. I had taken the elevator down to the street level and had nestled my pepper spray in the palm of one hand I exposed to the unusually cool autumn evening. Not that it ever gets very cold in Southern California in any season. My office building and the attached parking structure were locked and secured, but I had learned to take no chances. Men were everywhere. And so, for perverse reasons, they prided themselves on their abilities to outsmart safety procedures and security devices. When the door opened on the parking level, I peered left and then right before stepping into the uncertainty of the deserted open space. That's when I felt it. Tesla's electrical current. It was like I had walked under an enormous hairdryer, except there was no air flowing around me, just a gentle shaking. Like I said, as if somebody wanted my attention. The small hairs in the back of my head stood on end. My flesh turned into goosebumps. I didn't feel afraid exactly. I felt on guard, forewarned. I felt like somebody needed me. But who? Where? My reserved parking space was set on the street level, some 30 yards directly across from the exit barrier. It was my most coveted office possession, and it had even my name painted on the little concrete curb, Linda Hamilton, LMFT. From this space of honor, which I won through years of occupancy in a tenant lottery, I was able to drive my Civic directly through the security gate and out into the street without maneuvering around parking levels or contending with other traffic. Usually I would start my car, put it in gear, and by the time I had reached the barrier, it would have been risen to let me out. I had had a friend, yes, it was a man, connect my remote security gate opener with my starter. I believe in efficiency. But that night I didn't go directly to my car. I stopped short about halfway between the elevator and my parking space. My ears perked and listened to that silent call that was beckoning me. It wasn't a human voice exactly. It was of a higher order that communicated without words. It came to me through a pulsation around my left temple and in my heart. It wasn't an entirely unpleasant experience, just highly unusual, so much so that I knew I had to pay attention to it. It was strong, insistent. Something was telling me that I was needed somewhere. I spun on my knockoff high fashion heels and followed the sensations, slowly at first, like a hound catching the scent, until it became clear to me that the beckoning was coming from outside the garage. I made my way through the pedestrian security gate, wedging it open behind me, and into the brightly lit alley behind my office building, where I was able to see everything quite clearly. I looked left and then right. No one was in sight. I couldn't convince myself to leave, however, because the feeling of someone needing my assistance was stronger than it had been inside the garage. I felt compelled to turn to the right and follow the impulse that beckoned me, like a Geiger counter, in that direction. The alley was kept clear. I knew that because, as a member of the Building Tenants Association Board, I had been forced to read and update the rules that had been laid out for maintenance. No street people were allowed to take up a residence in our alley. They were to be encouraged to visit the homeless shelter the city had established in Old Town. And no debris was allowed to gather. The area was bright, clear, and open. The only area up and down the length of the alley that was blocked from sight was the storage space inside the cinder block walls that housed the dumpsters. Since nothing out of the ordinary was visible anywhere else, I made my way over to that. As I approached the dumpster area, I felt a rising tension, a nervous tingling in my body. For some reason, I knew that someone was there inside the cinder block walls. Even though the evening was quite cool, I broke into a prophetically fearful cold sweat. I rubbed the perspiration from my palm onto my coat and adjusted my can of pepper spray for maximum defense. I intended to be ready. The dumpster area wasn't locked, although it had been closed to appear to be. The padlock that hung on the hasp would close but wouldn't fully engage. It seemed that it cost more to send someone out to buy a new lock than the lock actually cost. Therefore, the area lay unsecured. That wasn't general knowledge, except to the tenants, the staff, and all the patrons of all the businesses that frequented our building, and certainly to the street people who, for some reason, declined our invitation to reconstruct our lives at the homeless shelter in Old Town. I approached the dumpster yard with growing concern. When I reached the gate, I stopped to look in every direction. I didn't want some poverty stricken drug addict to prolong his misery by ending mine with a blow to the back of my head that would gain him nothing more than the change in my purse. That was a logic I never understood. Why cause another person more harm than the supposed gain you'd receive by harming me? It was a pointless question because I knew the answer, and I knew I was stalling because I didn't want to open that gate. So I looked in every direction. Since I didn't see any would-be assailants within striking distance, I turned toward the gate and pulled on the lock. It came undone. I worked it through the hasp and laid it on top of the wall. Then I swung the gate open and peered inside. No boogeyman as yet, so pepper spray at the ready. I looked around each corner of the several dumpsters, and then I leaned around the side of one dumpster to inspect the space behind them. No one. Okay, so far so good. But the feeling that someone was in there continued to pull at me, and logic said that if there was no one around the dumpsters, The only place they left to hide would have to be in the dumpsters. I checked my back again and then lifted the lid of the first bin. It was shadowy inside, but no one jumped out at me. I poked around the plastic bags and the boxes, but nothing stirred. For some reason, I began to think about rats. I dropped the lid and stepped over to the second dumpster. The second one had the usual debris, plus a collection of drapes, throw rugs, and cheap artwork. Hmm. I wondered who was refurnishing our office. Probably a competitor, which meant that I had to update my look in order to stay competitive. Bitching wives could go anywhere. I'd have to call my decorator. The third dumpster gave me pause. Perhaps my native superstitions had kicked in. Perhaps I harbored an apprehension of the notion of third on a match, or third time's the charm. I don't know, but I was certain I didn't want to raise that lid. I stood frozen before the hulking metal chamber and somehow knew that my life was about to change. I was reconsidering my options when I heard an almost silent whisper, like the gasp of a soul that didn't want to leave, being sucked into the afterlife. It wasn't the loud and full of terror wail of a tormented sinner recoiling from his just deserts. No, rather it was a soft, plaintive exhalation, the melancholy sigh of an essence which had only glimpsed the circus that she would never be allowed to enjoy. I had the notion that what I heard was the last breath of an innocent who no longer had the strength to protest. Damn the rats, I thought as I threw open the lid. My suspicion had not been wrong. Before my eyes that were adjusting to the shadows in the dumpster lay a baby nestled in a cardboard box. A box that had been settled on top of the other debris in such a way that suggested care, concern, and a type of lamenting love for what could not be. At first, I didn't want to touch it for fear that I had been called there to witness the infant's passing, her crossing over. But finally, I dropped my pepper spray into my coat pocket, dove my hands around the baby, and scooped her out of the cardboard coffin. As I held her up before my eyes, I could see that she was a newborn, her face barely unwrinkled from her amniotic seclusion. She was virtually weightless, more of a possibility, a suggestion, more spirit than person, and cold, so very cold. The rags she wore would never have been enough to keep out the icy fingers of death. And she was beautiful, a porcelain goddess too perfect for this life, too perfect, too fragile, too ethereal to survive on a harsh human plane. As I stared into her motionless face, too overwhelmed to give in to my growing shock or to the tears that had gathered around my eyes without permission, I had the uncontrollable urge to place my forehead on hers. When our foreheads touched, I forced back the tears and refused to let them spill from my eyes. I wanted to cry for all the life that little innocent would not have, the childhood discoveries, the adolescent joys, the adult accomplishments, all the experiences that made life worth living. I wanted to cry, but I would not. I would not. I was a psychotherapist to know that my tears would have been not only for her, but for myself and my own lost chances. Therefore, I would not cry. I would not be that selfish. Between the heartbeats hammering at my chest, I sucked in gulps of air and held them in fear because I could see that the baby was not strong enough to breathe for herself. Then I grew angry. Angry at what had been done to this infant, and angry at all the selfishness that people had been made to suffer at the hands of parents, siblings, and mean spirited others. Angry for all the death blows to spirit from teachers and so called superiors that would cost a painful lifetime to repair. Anger at the needless insults, pointless abuses, and exhausting oppositions from thousands of jealous strangers. And I was angry at that infant's parents for giving me that moment of horror. angry at whatever spirit that had brought me to that place, angry, angry, angry at my impotence to return that infant to life. I was so angry that I shook her. Not violently, my anger was not directed at her, but I shook her to wake her up, to call her spirit back from whatever road it was traveling at that moment. I shook her so that she might return to this consciousness and restore my faith in an almighty being who is supposed to look out for the lost, the lonely, for abandoned babies and dumpsters, and for burnt out psychotherapists. When she didn't stir and my tears wanted to gush around my eyes, I called to her. I begged her through my clenched teeth, live, live. But she hadn't the strength. She remained lifeless in my hands. Then, from some atavistic knowledge, I took a breath and offered it to her. I took the air into my lungs, warmed it with my blood, mixed it with the molecules of my being, and offered it to her. I blew gently into her mouth. Nothing. Come on, little one, I whispered. You know how to do this. Expand your lungs. Take the air. She didn't move. But I had the feeling, the knowing, that she wanted to. I won't hurt you, I promised her. So quietly I could barely hear the words myself. I'll take care of you. A second time, I passed the breath to her. No response, but I was convinced that this was going to happen. No God would do this to either one of us. Put us this close together just to torment and tease us. I didn't create the hair, honey, I told her. It's God's gift to you. It's life, and it's yours. But you've got to take it. Come on, baby. Breathe. And for the third time, that spiritual number, that trinity of submission, hope, and expectation, I drew in the air and gently blew it towards the baby's face. I said, come on, baby. Breathe. For a moment, I despaired. The little thing hadn't responded. Her little lungs didn't expand, her little heart didn't beat. But then I felt a tiny rumble in her chest, like an engine that had been idle for too long. She jolted back to life and began drawing and expelling air. I watched her for a second to assure myself that she was really breathing. I watched her delicate nostrils flare and return. I watched her mouth pucker and suck. I watched until I was convinced I was holding a living being. Then I clutched the new life securely to my breast, whispered words I thought I no longer believed, thank you, Lord, and ran for my Civic.